Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone.
A couple of years ago, I regularly spent time with a small group of friends at one particular house. We usually gathered in the front yard of my friend's place. It was an easy place to sit around, talk, drink a little, and let the night pass without needing to go anywhere. Nothing about those evenings was usually serious. Someone would bring drinks. People would sit around a table or stand near the gate. We would look at our phones, tell stories, laugh about things that had happened during the week, and stay outside until everyone became tired enough to go home. The house itself had a strange atmosphere, though I did not always think about it while I was there. Over the years, different people claimed they had seen shadowy figures around the property. Objects sometimes seemed to move without anyone touching them. There were stories about things appearing near doors, in windows, or at the edge of the yard. Most of those incidents were brief enough to dismiss. A dark shape could be a person walking behind a curtain. An object might slide because it had been placed badly. Someone could hear a noise inside an old house and assume it was footsteps. I had experienced strange things at my parents' house before, so I was not completely closed to the idea that something unexplained could happen. At the same time, I did not want every odd sound or movement to become a ghost story. The night I remember most clearly began normally. A few of us were drinking in the front yard. I do not remember exactly how many people were present, but there were enough that the area felt busy. We were sitting close enough to talk easily, and everyone could see the table in front of us. At some point, I felt something touch the back of my shoulder. It was not painful. It felt like a finger poking me lightly, the way someone might try to get my attention without interrupting the conversation. I turned around. There was nobody standing behind me. The only thing there was the gate. I looked at it for a moment, expecting to see a loose branch, a piece of wire, or something else that could have brushed against me. Nothing was close enough. The gate was not moving. No one appeared to be hiding behind it. I shrugged it off. I thought perhaps one of my friends had reached around and touched me as a joke. Maybe someone had moved before I turned. It was not strange enough to stop the evening. A little later, I felt the same thing again. Another light tap on my shoulder. I turned quickly this time. Again, no one was there. My friends were still sitting where I could see them. Nobody was laughing or watching for my reaction. The gate remained behind me, silent and still. I considered moving my chair, but the sensation was more annoying than frightening. I wondered whether part of my shirt was catching against the chair. Perhaps an insect had landed on me. Maybe a muscle in my shoulder was twitching in a way that felt external. I rubbed the area and continued talking. The tapping returned throughout the night. It was never strong. Each time, it felt like a small poke from behind. After the first few times, I stopped turning around. There was nothing there whenever I checked, and I did not want to keep reacting in front of everyone. I decided to ignore it. Later, I was looking down at my phone. My drink was sitting in a cup or glass on the table in front of me. While my attention was on the screen, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. The cup was sliding. At first, I thought someone had bumped the table. I looked up. The cup continued moving slowly across the surface in my direction. It did not tip or wobble. It glided. I immediately told my friends to look. Everyone turned toward it. For several seconds, we watched the cup move on its own. Nobody had a hand near it. No one was leaning against the table hard enough to push it. It continued toward the edge. The movement was slow enough that we had time to understand what we were seeing. That is important to me. It was not a quick slip that happened before anyone could react. We watched it travel. When it reached the edge of the table, one of my friends reached out and stopped it before it fell. For a moment, no one said anything. Then everyone began talking at once. We immediately tried to find an explanation. The first possibility was moisture. A wet glass can slide across a smooth surface, especially if condensation creates a thin layer of water underneath it. If the table was slightly tilted, the cup might move slowly downhill. We lifted the cup and checked beneath it. The surface did not appear wet enough to explain the movement. We felt the table. It did not seem slippery. We tried placing the cup in the same area again. It stayed still. Someone suggested that perhaps one of us had been leaning against the table. We tested that too. We pressed against different sides, moved our arms, and shifted our weight. The table shook, but the cup did not travel in the same smooth way. If we tilted the surface enough to make it move, the angle was obvious. That had not been happening before. We also noticed something else during the tests. Whenever we pushed or dragged the cup across the table, it made noise. The base scraped against the surface. Even with only light pressure, there was a clear sound of glass or plastic moving over the tabletop. But when the cup had moved on its own, it had been silent. None of us remembered hearing any scrape. It had seemed to float just slightly above the table. I do not mean that we could see a gap underneath it. The cup did not visibly rise into the air, but its movement looked and sounded unusually smooth, as though its full weight was not pressing against the surface. That detail changed the mood completely. If the cup had simply slid on water, we should have heard some contact with the table. Perhaps the noise had been too soft to notice while we were talking. But once everyone focused on it, the silence became one of the main things we remembered. I then told my friends that something had been tapping my shoulder all night. Until that moment, I had kept it to myself. The taps suddenly seemed connected to the cup. It felt as though something had been trying to get my attention. I had ignored it, so it moved an object directly in front of me. My friend then mentioned that someone had died in the house before their family moved there. I do not know the full history. I do not know who died, where in the house it happened, or whether the story was confirmed. It may have been something the previous owners mentioned, or something neighbors said later. But once that information entered the conversation, the moving cup became part of a haunting. The taps were no longer muscle twitches or insects. They were someone touching me. The cup was no longer sliding. It was being moved. The death gave the event an identity, even though we did not know who the person had been. That is one way ghost stories grow. A strange event happens first. Then, someone discovers a death connected to the location. The two facts become inseparable. From that point onward, every unexplained movement is attributed to the dead person. I have tried to consider ordinary explanations, especially because we had been drinking. Alcohol affects attention, balance, judgment, and memory. Even a small amount can make people less accurate about timing and movement. If several friends had been drinking, we may have overlooked something obvious. Someone could have bumped the table and immediately forgotten. The cup may have moved only a few inches, while memory later made the distance longer. The movement may have lasted 2 seconds, rather than the extended glide I now picture. Because everyone reacted together, our memories could have influenced one another. One person said it made no noise. The rest began remembering silence. Someone said it looked like it floated. That description became part of the group story. None of this requires anyone to lie. Shared memories become more similar each time people discuss them. The strongest version gradually replaces the uncertain one. Still, we were not so intoxicated that we could not observe the table. We were able to test several explanations afterward. The cup moved clearly enough that I pointed it out before it reached the edge. Everyone watched the final part of the movement. Even if alcohol changed some details, something physical appears to have happened. Condensation remains one of the most likely causes. Cold drinks create water beneath them. On a smooth plastic, metal, or glass table, that water can greatly reduce friction. If the surface has even a slight slope, the cup can begin moving gradually. The table may appear level while still being angled enough for a wet cup to slide. Outdoor tables are rarely perfectly flat. The ground underneath may be uneven. One leg could sink slightly into soil. Someone shifting their weight nearby might change the angle just enough to start the movement. Once the cup began sliding, momentum carried it toward the edge. When we later tested it, the water may have been wiped away, spread differently, or absorbed. Lifting the cup would break the thin seal beneath it. Replacing it would not recreate the exact conditions. The silent movement might also make sense if the cup was floating on a very thin layer of water. A film of liquid can reduce the scraping sound. During our later tests, the base may have been drier, causing the noise we noticed. That explanation fits almost every physical detail. It also explains why the cup moved smoothly rather than vibrating. The problem is that we checked for moisture and did not find enough. But not enough is based on our judgment, not a measurement. A very small amount of water can change friction. The bottom of the cup may have been wet while the table around it looked dry. If we picked it up immediately, the moisture could remain attached to the base or spread too thinly to notice. The table could also have had a coating of dust, spilled drink, or cleaning product that made one area more slippery than another. We did not inspect it scientifically. We were frightened friends in a yard, trying random ideas. Vibration is another possibility. Traffic, a passing truck, music, machinery, footsteps, or someone moving near the table could create a low vibration. A smooth cup might slowly travel across a vibrating surface. This is sometimes called vibrational walking. An object with an uneven base can move gradually as tiny repeated motions push it in one direction. The movement can appear steady and deliberate, even though each individual shift is extremely small. If the table was touching a fence, wall, or porch, vibrations from elsewhere could travel into it. Perhaps a washing machine was running inside the house. A vehicle may have idled nearby. Someone could have been tapping a foot against the table leg without noticing. Once the vibration stopped, we would be unable to reproduce the movement. That would explain why leaning on the table later did not work. Our tests created different types of motion. The original vibration may have been faster and more regular. The cup's silent glide could come from tiny repeated jumps too small to hear individually. Another person at the gathering may have caused it as a prank. A clear thread or fishing line attached to the cup could pull it across the surface. Someone might have used a magnet if the cup or an object beneath it contained metal. A person under the table could move it without being seen. But none of us discovered a line or device. The cup moved toward me rather than toward someone who appeared to be controlling it. The event seemed spontaneous, and nobody eventually admitted responsibility. A prank is always possible when a group of friends is drinking and trying to scare one another. Someone might have known about the death in the house and wanted to create a story. They could tap my shoulder, then later moved the cup. The taps and cup movement together would be an effective performance. The gate behind me may have provided a hiding place. A person could reach through or around it and touch my shoulder. But I turned around more than once and saw nobody. My friends remained in front of me. Unless someone outside the group was involved, the tapping would be difficult to stage repeatedly without being noticed. The cup could have been pulled from a distance, but the person would need time to prepare the setup. Nothing about the evening suggested an organized prank. The tapping may have had a completely separate explanation. A loose piece of clothing could touch my shoulder whenever I moved. A hanging strap, chain, wire, or plant near the gate might brush me in the breeze. A small insect could land repeatedly. Muscle fasciculations can also feel like tapping from outside the body. A nerve in the shoulder may twitch in short pulses, creating the sensation of a finger. Alcohol, dehydration, fatigue, and posture can make muscle twitching more likely. Because the taps occurred behind me, I assumed someone was responsible. Once the cup moved, I connected the two events. There may have been no connection at all. This is important because humans naturally create one cause for several unusual experiences. The shoulder sensation happened throughout the evening. Later, the cup slid due to condensation or vibration. My friend mentioned a death. Those three separate facts became a single story about a spirit trying to communicate. That story feels stronger than three unrelated coincidences. But reality does not always provide one explanation. The movement also may not have been as silent as we believed. Before I drew attention to the cup, everyone was talking, and there may have been music, traffic, or wind. A light scraping sound would be easy to miss. When we tested it afterward, the group became completely quiet and focused. The same sound would seem much louder under those conditions. We compared movement observed during conversation with movement tested in silence. The difference may have been attention, not contact. The cup might also have been made of a material that changed as liquid inside it shifted. If ice melted or the drink moved to one side, the center of gravity could change. A slightly deformed base could release suddenly after sticking to the table. The cup might remain motionless for a long time, then begin sliding when the seal underneath broke. That delayed movement would feel purposeful. None of these explanations are unusual. Together, they make a natural cause likely. But the fact that several people watched the cup continue moving remains unsettling. Most visual mistakes happen quickly. A person looks up after an object has already shifted and assumes it is still moving. In our case, I alerted everyone while it was in motion. My friend had enough time to stop it at the edge. Even if the cause was moisture, the sight itself was real. The question is what force acted on it. The paranormal explanation is that a presence at the house was trying to get my attention. It began with gentle touches. When I ignored them, it used the cup. The object moved toward me, not randomly away. It stopped only because my friend caught it. The absence of scraping suggested it was being lifted rather than pushed. Afterward, we learned or remembered that someone had died in the house. The later reports of shadows and moving objects make the incident seem like part of an ongoing pattern. Maybe the person who died remained near the property. Perhaps the presence was curious rather than hostile. The taps were not painful. The cup was not thrown. Nothing attacked us. It may only have wanted to be noticed. That interpretation is less frightening than the idea of something aggressive, but it still changes the feeling of the yard. We had been sitting in a place that seemed empty except for our group. If something invisible was standing behind me, it was close enough to touch my shoulder repeatedly. It listened while I ignored it. Then it moved my drink. The silence of the cup is what keeps that image alive. A glass dragged by an unseen hand should still scrape. If it moved without sound, perhaps it was not touching the table in the usual way. But silence is difficult to prove from memory. We did not record the event. No one placed the camera under the cup. We did not mark the starting point or measure the slope. We did not check the table with a level. We did not inspect the legs, ground, or underside. By the time we began testing, the original conditions had changed. The cup had been caught, lifted, handled, and replaced. Our fear also changed how carefully we observed everything. The moment cannot now be reconstructed. I have had other unexplained experiences, especially at my parents' home. Because of that, I may be more willing to connect an unusual event with something paranormal. Someone with no earlier experiences might immediately accept condensation and forget the incident. I already knew what it felt like to see a shadow where no one stood or hear something with no visible source. The cup joined a category that already existed in my mind. That does not make me wrong. It only means I was not a neutral observer. My expectations were shaped by previous events. The same was true for my friend, who knew someone had died in the house and had seen other strange things there. Once he mentioned that history, everyone had a reason to view the movement differently. I sometimes wonder why the presence would choose me. Perhaps I was sitting closest to the gate or to wherever it usually appeared. Maybe the taps were caused by something physical in that exact position, which would also explain why no one else felt them. Or perhaps whatever remained at the house recognized that I was more sensitive to unusual events. That idea is impossible to prove and easy to build into a larger story. I prefer not to assume I attract spirits. The more practical answer is that I happened to be seated near a source of irritation, and my cup happened to be on a tilted, slippery table. The timing made them feel connected. Still, when I remember the event, I do not first remember the explanations. I remember looking down at my phone. At the edge of my vision, the cup begins to move. I look up. It is gliding toward me. I tell everyone to watch. The conversation stops. Several people stare as the cup continues traveling across the table. No one touches it. It reaches the edge, and my friend catches it. Then we spend the next several minutes trying to force it to do the same thing. We wet the surface. We lean on the table. We push the cup. Every attempt sounds wrong. Scrape, drag, rattle, the original movement had sounded like nothing. Only after the tests do I tell them about the taps on my shoulder. What had seemed small and easy to ignore suddenly feels like a warning I failed to understand. My friend tells us that someone died in the house before they moved in. The front yard becomes quieter. The gate behind me no longer feels empty. I do not know whether a spirit moved the cup. Condensation, tilt, vibration, and group memory are all strong explanations. The silent glide may be an exaggeration created by fear. The shoulder taps may have been muscle twitches or something brushing my clothing. The death in the house may have had no connection to anything we experienced. That is probably the most reasonable conclusion. But the event remains unsolved because we all saw the final movement. It was not only a feeling I had alone. The cup traveled far enough for several people to follow it with their eyes. It moved all the way to the edge. One of my friends had to stop it from falling. Whatever caused it was real enough to change the cup's position. The argument is only about what that cause was. Over the years, we continued seeing strange shadows and small movements around the house. Some were probably ordinary. The more a place gains a haunted reputation, the more often people notice ambiguous things. A person walks past the doorway and is remembered as a dark figure. A settling object becomes evidence of movement. A pet reacts to a sound beyond human hearing, and people assume it sees someone. But I always return to the cup because it was slow, shared, and physical. A shadow can be misread. A tap can come from inside the body. The cup crossed the table. Maybe a thin film of water carried it. Maybe vibration moved it without an obvious scrape. Maybe one of my friends created a prank so well that nobody ever discovered it. I can accept any of those possibilities. But when I picture that night, I still feel the repeated poke on my shoulder. Something behind me appears to be asking for my attention. I ignore it. Then the cup starts moving toward me. Everyone becomes quiet enough to watch. And for a few seconds, while it glides soundlessly across the table, it feels as though whatever had been standing by the gate has finally found a way to make all of us look. I was around 14 years old when this happened at a friend's house during a snowstorm. We were stuck indoors and bored, doing the sort of pointless things teenagers do when there is nowhere else to go. My friend was lying on his bed playing his Game Boy, while I had decided to repair a broken pair of electric hair clippers. I had no real idea what I was doing. I was taking the clippers apart, examining the pieces, and convincing myself I might somehow get them working again. To understand why what happened frightened me so badly, the layout of the bedroom is important. The room was roughly square. The door was on the west wall. My friend's bed sat in the northeast corner, and a bookcase stood in the southeast corner. The south and east walls had unusual windows near the ceiling. They were long and narrow, running horizontally across the upper part of the walls rather than sitting at normal eye level. My friend was stretched out on the bed facing the door. I stood near the bookcase working on the clippers. At 14, I was a little over 5 feet tall. Because of where the bookcase stood, the lower corner of the south-facing window was almost exactly level with my head. If I turned slightly, my right ear was close to that section of wall and window. It was night, probably around 7 or 8. Snow was still falling outside. The storm had covered the ground around the house in a clean layer of fresh snow. The room was warm compared with the cold outdoors, and nothing unusual had happened all evening. I had been standing by the bookcase for a while. My attention was completely focused on the clippers. Then I heard breathing directly beside my right ear. It was not ordinary breathing. It was deep, rough, and unnatural. The sound was so low and raspy that it did not immediately seem human. It sounded as though something large was forcing air through a throat that was too narrow or badly damaged. I can still remember it clearly. I have tried to imitate the sound over the years, but I cannot reproduce it properly. Whenever I lower my voice and breathe through my throat, it still sounds obviously human. What I heard did not. It was only inches away from me, on the other side of the window. I did not hear footsteps approaching through the snow. There was no scrape against the wall or tap on the glass. The breathing simply began beside my ear. In that instant, I became completely certain that some kind of creature was standing outside the window. I did not reason through the possibilities. I did not think about wind, animals, pipes, or building noises. My body reacted before my mind could. Everything seemed to slow down. The clippers stopped mattering. The room narrowed until all that existed was the window beside my head and the breathing on the other side of it. Adrenaline hit me so hard that I lost control of my movements. I stumbled backward over the corner of the bed, fell or half rolled across it, then scrambled over the floor toward the north wall. I pointed at the window and screamed. It was not a normal shout. It was the kind of scream that comes out when someone believes they are about to be attacked. My friend dropped what he was doing. He had not heard the breathing, but he saw my reaction and immediately knew I was not joking. I got to my feet and ran out of the bedroom toward the living room, where his mother was. My friend followed directly behind me. I tried to explain what I had heard. I told her someone, or something, had been outside the window breathing into my ear. The height of the window made the situation even more frightening. A normal person standing on the ground should not have been able to place their face beside that part of the glass. The window was near the top of the wall, and the ground outside was lower. Someone would have needed to be extremely tall, standing on something, or climbing against the building. My friend's mother took the situation seriously enough to call the police. At that point, we believed a person might be hiding around the house. Perhaps someone had been watching us through the window. Maybe an adult had decided to scare us and was still outside. We waited in the living room while the police came. The wait felt much longer than it probably was. Every sound from the roof and walls made me think the person had moved to another side of the house. I imagined a face appearing against a different window. I imagined someone testing a door. The storm continued outside, covering everything in silence. About 20 minutes later, the police arrived. My friend's mother explained that we believed someone had been standing outside the bedroom. The officers searched around the house. They checked near the windows and walked around the property looking for anyone hiding nearby. After a few minutes, they came back and said they had found no one. More importantly, they had found no footprints. The snow around the house was fresh. If someone had walked up to the window, stood there, and then left, there should have been tracks. There were none. That was when the fear became something else. Before the search, I could tell myself a person had frightened me. That would be disturbing, but understandable. Someone could be caught. There would be a physical explanation. The untouched snow removed that explanation, at least in my mind. Whatever had breathed beside my ear had apparently reached a high window without walking through the snow. I refused to return to the bedroom. I slept in the living room that night. Even there, I had trouble closing my eyes. Every time the house creaked, I remembered the sound. Deep, wet, raspy, close enough that I had felt as though breath might fog the glass beside me. The event was never explained. We considered whether my friend's mother's boyfriend might have been responsible. Perhaps he had gone outside and played a prank. But he would have needed to know exactly where I was standing and somehow reach the elevated window without leaving tracks. He also had no reason to continue denying it after the police had been called. A prank stops being funny once officers are searching the property. If he had done it, admitting it would have prevented the family from remaining frightened. As far as I know, he never confessed. Most people who hear the story say it was probably the wind. That is possible. Wind can produce extremely strange sounds when it passes through narrow gaps around windows, damaged seals, vents, siding, gutters, and roof edges. A small opening can turn moving air into a whistle, groan, moan, or pulsing breath. If snow or ice partly blocked a gap, the air might have passed through unevenly, producing a rough inhaling and exhaling sound. The storm could also change pressure around the building. Wind striking one side of the house may force air through a crack on another side. Because my ear was close to the window, I would hear the sound much more clearly than my friend on the bed. That could explain why he heard nothing. The noise may have existed only in a tiny area near the frame. It may even have vibrated through the glass or wall rather than coming from outside. From my position, it would seem as though a mouth was inches away. The timing also supports that possibility. It was actively snowing, and weather conditions can change suddenly. A strong gust could create a sound that had not occurred during the previous minutes. Then, the wind direction changed, and it never happened again. That is a sensible explanation, but the sound did not resemble any wind I had heard before. I had been standing there long enough to become familiar with the room's normal noises. There had been no gradual whistling or rattling. The breathing began abruptly and sounded deliberate. Years later, I worked as a building manager. Over more than 20 years, I heard nearly every kind of noise an old or damaged structure can produce. I heard pipes knocking, boilers groaning, loose windows chattering, ducts expanding, rodents moving in walls, and wind forcing itself through bad seals. Some sounds were strange enough to frighten tenants. I never heard anything that matched the breathing at that window. That does not mean a building could not create it. There are countless combinations of material, pressure, temperature, and damage. A sound may occur once under very specific conditions and never repeat. My experience with buildings only makes me less satisfied with the explanation. It does not disprove it. An animal is another possibility. A large animal could have approached the side of the house and breathed near an opening. A deer, dog, or other creature can make deep, rough sounds, especially when frightened, injured, or smelling something unfamiliar. An animal's breathing can sound surprisingly inhuman when heard without seeing the source. But the height of the window remains a problem. A large deer might raise its head high enough, depending on the ground level outside. If there was a snowbank, slope, porch, or object beneath the window, the animal could have stood closer to the glass than I realized. I was inside and did not inspect the exact height from outdoors. The window may not have been as unreachable as it appeared. The police also may not have noticed animal tracks. They were looking for a human intruder. Falling snow can soften or cover tracks quickly, especially if the animal approached before the heaviest part of the storm. Wind can fill shallow prints. The officers arrived 20 minutes later, giving the weather time to alter the ground. However, they reportedly found no disturbance at all. A large animal standing beside the house should have left obvious marks. There might have been tracks, compressed snow, or scrapes on the wall. None were reported. A bird could have landed near the window or roof. Large birds sometimes make harsh breathing, hissing, or growling sounds. An owl outside a dark window could create an eerie rasp while remaining nearly invisible. A bird would not leave footprints on the ground because it could fly directly to the building. That fits the lack of tracks. It could have perched on the window ledge, roof edge, or gutter directly beside my head. Owls can hiss defensively, and some calls sound more like breathing than birdsong. Snowy weather might force a bird to shelter near the house. When I screamed and moved, it could have flown away before anyone looked. This may be one of the better ordinary explanations. At 14, hearing a large bird hiss inches from the window without seeing it could easily feel like a creature breathing. The sound would be loudest beside my ear and nearly inaudible across the room. The police might find no sign of it afterward, but I remember a repeated inhale and exhale quality rather than one hiss. I felt sure something was breathing steadily. Fear can organize unclear sound into a familiar pattern. A bird rasping several times could become breathing in memory. The window itself may also have amplified a much smaller source. A mouse or other animal inside the wall could scratch or breathe near a hollow section, and the construction might carry the sound directly to the frame. My ear happened to be at the exact place where the vibration emerged. The animal would not need to be outside at all. That would explain the untouched snow. It might also explain why the sound felt almost inside the room. Still, the volume and depth seemed far too great for a small animal. Another possibility is that the sound came from the clippers. I was holding a broken electrical device and moving its parts. A motor, spring, blade, or loose component might have scraped in a way that resembled breathing. If I accidentally powered it or shifted a damaged mechanism near my body, the sound could have traveled upward and seemed to come from my right side. But I had been looking directly at the clippers. I knew where they were. The sound appeared beside my ear, not in my hands. My immediate conviction that it came from the window may have been wrong, yet the location felt precise. My friend also would likely have seen or heard the clippers make noise. He did not. There could have been a person outside without footprints, for reasons we did not recognize. Someone might have approached along a cleared path, roof, fence, or hard surface hidden beneath the snow. They could have leaned from a nearby structure, or used a ladder placed before the snowfall. Perhaps the police did not search as carefully as we believed. They may have walked around briefly, seen no obvious tracks, and decided it was a child frightened by a storm. Fresh snow is good evidence, but only if every possible route is examined. Someone could also have made the sound through a vent or pipe from another location. A person inside a neighboring room, attic, or exterior crawl space might produce noise that emerged near the window. We never inspected the wall itself. Still, there was no reason for anyone to target me. I was not standing in a predictable place. I had moved to the bookcase only because I was playing with the clippers. A prankster outside would need to see through the dark window, notice the position of my head, and place their mouth beside it. With the room lit and the exterior dark, a person outside might have been able to see us clearly while remaining hidden. That thought has always bothered me. At night, windows act differently depending on which side is brighter. From inside a lit room, we often see only reflections. Someone outside in darkness can watch without being noticed. Maybe a person was there. The lack of footprints might be an error, a result of falling snow, or an incomplete search. If so, the incident becomes less supernatural but more threatening. A living person had been watching two teenagers through an elevated window and chose to breathe loudly beside one of them. That is not comforting. There is also the possibility that I experienced a brief auditory hallucination. I was awake, active, and not falling asleep, so a sleep-related explanation does not fit well. But healthy people can occasionally hear sounds that are not externally present, especially under stress, exhaustion, illness, or intense concentration. The rasping could have been generated by my brain or by a sound inside my own body. Breathing, blood flow, muscle movement, or a shift in the ear can sometimes seem external. A sudden blockage or pressure change in one ear may distort internal sounds. My own breathing could have echoed strangely for a few seconds. The room, snowstorm, and silence may have made it feel as though another creature was beside me. The reaction was so immediate that I never paused to compare the rhythm with my own breath. However, the sound felt separate from me. It had a depth and texture that seemed to belong to something larger. I did not hear voices or experience anything similar before or afterward. An isolated auditory hallucination remains possible, but there is no evidence for it beyond the absence of a source. The snow may also have affected the acoustics. Fresh snow absorbs many ordinary environmental sounds, making the outside unusually quiet. That silence can make a single nearby noise feel intense and close. At the same time, snow and low cloud can reflect other sounds in unexpected ways. An animal, vehicle, machine, or person farther away might seem to be directly outside the window. If a truck engine idled nearby or someone used equipment, a low pulsing sound could travel through the air and building. My position beside the glass might create the exact illusion of breathing. My friend, farther away, may not hear it because the sound focused at one point, or because he was absorbed in his game. A heater, vent, or furnace may also have started at that moment. Air moving through an old system can produce rhythmic, breath-like sounds. The sound could travel inside the wall and emerge around the window frame. As a building manager, I later heard systems make strange noises, even if none exactly matched this one. The fact that it happened during a snowstorm means heating equipment was probably working hard. A pressure change, blocked vent, or icy exterior opening could create a unique rasp. That may be the most technically realistic explanation. The storm altered the airflow. The heating system or wind pushed air through a narrow obstruction. The frame beside my ear amplified it. I interpreted it as a creature because I had no visual source. My panic ended the event before I could investigate. Afterward, the pressure changed or the blockage cleared, so the noise never repeated. Yet that explanation still feels too calm compared with what I heard. The sound contained presence. It did not seem like air moving through wood. It seemed like lungs. That distinction may exist only in my memory, but it is the reason the incident remains frightening. The most disturbing part is how certain I became before I even turned. I did not think, what is that noise? I knew there was something at the window. The certainty came from a primitive part of the brain. Humans recognize breathing because it suggests another living body nearby. When it comes from inches away in darkness, the body reacts as though a predator has entered personal space. My scream, fall, and escape were not chosen. They were survival responses. The police found no tracks, but their search also froze the mystery in place. Had we gone outside immediately, perhaps we would have found an owl, animal, damaged vent, or prankster. Instead, 20 minutes passed. Snow continued falling. Anything living had time to leave. Any temporary mechanical condition had time to stop. By the time adults examined the scene, there was nothing left to study. The room itself probably looked ordinary. A high window, a bookcase, a bed, a frightened teenager refusing to sleep there. I do not claim that a monster stood outside. I never saw a face, hand, eye, or body. I heard one sound. However unnatural it seemed, sound alone is easy to misidentify. Wind, wildlife, heating systems, and building materials can produce noises far stranger than people expect. The absence of footprints makes a bird, wall noise, or airflow more likely than a person or ground animal. My age and fear may have exaggerated the details over time. The breathing may have lasted only a second, though memory makes it feel longer. The depth may have grown with every retelling. My later experience as a building manager may have made me more confident that it was unique, but no one can perfectly compare a childhood memory with decades of later sounds. Those are all reasonable cautions. Even so, I remember the exact position of my body, the broken clippers in front of me, my friend on the bed, the corner of the window beside my right ear. Then the sudden rasp of something drawing breath on the other side of the glass. I remember the certainty that a creature was there. I remember falling backward, crawling across the floor, and pointing at the window while screaming. I remember my friend running after me even though he had heard nothing, because the fear on my face was enough. Then I remember the police returning from their search. No one outside. No footprints in the snow. That should support an ordinary explanation. Nothing physical had approached the window. But at 14, it did not feel like reassurance. It felt as though whatever had been there did not need to walk away. Maybe an owl landed on the ledge and hissed. Maybe wind moved through a damaged seal in exactly the right way. Maybe the heating system forced air through the wall. Maybe the snow covered tracks before the officers arrived. One of those answers is probably correct. But even now, more than 20 years later, I cannot reproduce that sound. I have stood inside old buildings during storms. I have listened to failing equipment, damaged windows, trapped animals, and air moving through pipes. Nothing has ever brought me back to that room completely. Only the memory does. A warm bedroom on a snowy night. My friend absorbed in his game, my head level, with a narrow window high on the wall. And something outside, where the fresh snow later showed no sign of anyone standing, breathing deeply into my right ear as though it had been watching me long enough to know exactly where I was. When I was in 6th grade, my school took us to a 3-day camp at Mount Baldy in California. For most of us, it was the kind of trip we had been looking forward to for weeks. We were old enough to feel independent, because we were away from home, but still young enough that sleeping in cabins and walking through the woods at night felt like a serious adventure. The mountain was different after dark. During the day, the trails and trees felt open and harmless. At night, the same landscape became difficult to judge. The darkness between the trees seemed much deeper than it really was, and every noise carried farther than expected. On the first night, a group of us went on a hike through the woods. There were probably 9 people in total, including one of the camp guides. My best friend was there, along with another friend I knew well. We stayed fairly close together. The guide walked with us, talking and probably explaining something about the forest. I do not remember the subject, because what happened next erased almost everything else about that hike. We were moving along the trail when I suddenly noticed something above us. It was an aircraft, or at least it looked like one. Its shape resembled a large V. I could not see much detail because it was night, but the outline was clear enough that I immediately recognized it as something flying overhead. It seemed unbelievably low. From where I stood, it looked as though it passed less than 100 feet above the trees in our heads. That distance may not have been accurate. Judging the altitude of an object at night is extremely difficult, especially when there are no visible buildings or landmarks nearby. But in that moment, it felt dangerously close. As the craft passed over us, the entire world seemed to erupt. The sound was enormous. It was not merely the normal distant roar of a passenger plane. It was so loud that I could not hear the camp guide, even though he was only around 10 feet away from me. I could see him and the other people in the group, but his voice disappeared under the noise. The ground shook beneath my feet. It felt like a huge earthquake had started at the exact moment the V-shaped craft reached us. The trees, air, and earth seemed to become part of one violent disturbance. I remember feeling completely overwhelmed. There was too much sound, too much vibration, too much movement. For several seconds, it felt as though the world around me was raging. I expected everyone to panic. I thought the guide would order us to get down or move away from the trees. I expected my friends to cover their ears, shout, or point toward the sky. Nobody reacted. That was the strangest part. The others continued behaving as though nothing unusual had happened. The guide did not stop. No one looked upward. No one asked what the noise was. The aircraft crossed above us. The roar faded, and the ground became still again. To everyone else, it appeared to have been an ordinary night in the woods. I immediately asked my best friend whether he had seen the plane. He had no idea what I was talking about. I asked another friend. They had not seen or heard anything either. I looked around at the rest of the group, trying to understand how 9 people could have missed something that seemed powerful enough to shake the mountain. No one appeared frightened. No one was rubbing their ears. No one behaved as though they had just experienced an aircraft passing only a short distance overhead. I was the only one who had noticed. That terrified me more than the aircraft itself. If everyone had seen it, then it would have been an unusual but shared event. Perhaps a military aircraft had flown too low. Maybe a helicopter or experimental plane had crossed the mountain. We could have asked the camp staff about it later. Instead, I was left with an experience that seemed physically impossible and completely private. I had seen the V-shaped object. I had heard the deafening noise. I had felt the earth shaking beneath me. But according to the people standing around me, none of it had happened. For years, I wondered whether the craft had been something extraterrestrial. The V-shape stayed in my memory. It did not look like a normal passenger plane with a long body and separate wings. It appeared almost like one solid triangular or boomerang-shaped object. At night, a craft like that could easily become associated with stories about unidentified flying objects. The fact that nobody else noticed it made the experience feel even less ordinary. Maybe it had appeared only to me. Maybe the others had somehow been unable to perceive it. Or perhaps I experienced the few seconds in which something passed through the same place without fully interacting with everyone around me. Those are dramatic possibilities, but they are not the only ones. There are several ordinary explanations I have considered. The first is that I saw a real aircraft but misjudged its distance. An object flying at night can appear much closer than it actually is. Without visible clouds, buildings, or a clear horizon, there is almost nothing to provide scale. A large aircraft flying high above the mountain might look as though it were skimming the trees. If it had a broad, swept wing design, its silhouette could appear V-shaped. Lights on the wings might define the edges while hiding the rest of the body. The dark center could blend into the sky, leaving only the impression of one wide angular form. The sound may have arrived later than the visual image. Aircraft noise does not always seem to come from the object's exact position because sound travels more slowly than light and can be bent or reflected by terrain. In a mountainous area, noise may echo between slopes and arrive from several directions. I might have looked upward when the aircraft was visible, then heard its engine roar at the same moment a stronger echo reached the trail. That could make the craft feel directly overhead and extremely low. The guide and other students may have heard it, but considered it normal. Perhaps aircraft passed over the area often enough that the staff barely reacted. My friends may have been distracted, talking or looking at the trail. When I asked afterward, they may not have understood which sound I meant. A child might answer no because they did not see the plane, even if they noticed a general roar. But that explanation does not fit the intensity I remember. The sound seemed to erase everything else. The guide's voice vanished. The ground shook like an earthquake. It is difficult to believe that 8 other people experienced the same disturbance without even glancing upward. Perhaps the ground did not physically shake. Extremely loud, low-frequency sound can create a sensation of vibration inside the body. The chest, inner ear, and bones may respond to powerful noise. That can feel as though the earth itself is moving. If the aircraft produced a deep rumble, I may have interpreted the vibration through my legs as movement in the trail. My balance could have become unstable for a moment. The trees may have blurred or seemed to shake because my eyes and inner ear were overwhelmed. Everyone else might have heard a loud aircraft while I experienced the sound more strongly. People vary in their sensitivity to low frequencies. A noise that feels physically disturbing to one person may be only annoying to another. Yet I do not remember anyone acknowledging even a loud plane. Another possibility is that 2 separate events happened at nearly the same moment. I may have seen a distant aircraft while something else caused the noise and shaking. A heavy vehicle, equipment, falling tree, minor earthquake, or distant explosion could create vibration through the ground. Because I noticed the V-shaped object at the same time, my brain connected the two. The aircraft became the source of everything. The other hikers might have felt only a small tremor or heard a distant boom and dismissed it. My attention was fixed upward, so the combined effect felt much larger to me. Memory often joins events that occur close together. The original experience may have been less perfectly synchronized than I now remember. Perhaps the ground vibrated first. Then I looked up and saw the plane. Years later, the order became one smooth sequence. The V-shaped craft passed over, the noise exploded, and the earth shook beneath it. That does not mean I invented anything. It means the brain stores the meaning of an event more reliably than its exact timing. There may also have been an earthquake or small local tremor. Children do not always recognize mild earthquakes, especially outdoors where there are no hanging lights or walls to show movement. A brief tremor beneath a group walking on uneven ground might go unnoticed by most of them. I may have been standing still at the moment while the others continued walking. Because my feet were planted, I felt the motion more clearly. The aircraft and tremor could have occurred by coincidence. Again, that would be an extraordinary coincidence, but not an impossible one. The sound could also have come from wind. Strong wind moving suddenly through tall trees can create a roar similar to machinery. A large gust may shake branches, move the ground cover, and create the feeling that the whole forest is reacting. If the gust arrived while an aircraft crossed overhead, the two sensations would merge. The other hikers might have considered it ordinary mountain weather. I, already looking at the strange shape above us, interpreted the wind as part of the craft's passage. However, I remember the sound as mechanical and overwhelming, not like wind through trees. There is another explanation that focuses not on the aircraft, but on my perception. I may have experienced a brief sensory hallucination. Hallucinations are often associated with severe mental illness, but healthy people can occasionally experience isolated visual or auditory events, especially under unusual conditions. I was a child away from home, in a dark forest, probably tired after a long day. My normal sleep schedule had likely been disrupted. Excitement, anxiety, dehydration, altitude, hunger, and physical exertion can all affect perception. A migraine aura can create visual shapes, flashes, dark areas, or distortions, even without a severe headache. Some people experience sudden changes in sound, balance, and bodily sensation during migraines. A dark V-shaped form might have crossed my vision, while an internal roaring sound overwhelmed my hearing. The feeling of ground movement could come from vertigo. If the event lasted only seconds, I might recover quickly and remain fully conscious. The guide and other students would notice nothing, because nothing external had happened. I do not remember having a headache, nausea, or visual symptoms afterward. But migraines do not always follow the same pattern, especially in children. It could have been an isolated neurological event that never repeated. A brief seizure is another medical possibility, although I have no reason to believe that is what happened. Certain focal seizures can produce unusual sights, sounds, bodily sensations, and changes in awareness while the person remains standing. A person may see shapes or hear intense noises that no one else perceives. Time can feel distorted. An event lasting only a few seconds may seem much longer. Afterward, the person may feel confused, but otherwise normal. I do not remember losing awareness, falling, or experiencing similar episodes later. Without repeated symptoms, there is no evidence for a seizure. Still, a private sensory event has to be considered when everyone nearby reports nothing. The experience may also have involved dissociation. Children can become mentally detached from their surroundings when frightened, exhausted, or overwhelmed. The world may suddenly feel unreal. Sound can become distant or extremely loud. The ground may feel unstable. A normal object can take on a strange shape and significance. The camp environment may have made me more vulnerable to that. I was away from my parents, walking through dark woods with limited control over where we were going. Even if I did not feel consciously afraid before the event, my nervous system may have been highly alert. A normal aircraft appeared, and my perception amplified it into something enormous. The other students continued walking because the actual plane was distant and unremarkable. Inside my experience, however, it became close enough to shake the earth. A panic response can also cause intense physical sensations. Adrenaline can make hearing change, produce ringing or roaring, cause dizziness, and create the feeling that the ground is moving. But panic usually follows a frightening trigger. In this case, seeing the craft could have been the trigger. I looked up, believed an enormous object was about to hit us, and my body reacted instantly. The roar may have been real, but less intense than I remember. My fear magnified it. Tunnel vision narrowed my awareness to the aircraft. I stopped registering the reactions of the people around me accurately. They may have looked up or paused, but my memory contains only their apparent indifference. When I asked my friends later, they said they did not know what I meant, reinforcing the idea that nobody noticed. Memory can become more extreme each time it is recalled. The plane becomes lower. The noise becomes louder. The group becomes completely motionless. The central contradiction grows because that is what makes the experience impossible. I have to allow for that, especially because I was in 6th grade. I was old enough to form a detailed memory, but still young enough to misjudge size, distance, and the behavior of others. Maybe the aircraft was not less than 100 feet above us. At that altitude, flying over a wooded mountain at night would be extremely dangerous. The object would have needed to clear trees and uneven terrain with almost no margin. A large aircraft passing that low would likely create powerful wind and would be difficult for anyone nearby to miss. If there was no damage to the trees and no reaction from the guide, the true altitude was probably much higher. The V-shape itself may have been created by ordinary lights. Many aircraft display lights near their wings and body. At night, the dark spaces between those points can form a triangle or V even when the actual aircraft has a conventional shape. Several aircraft flying in formation could also appear as one object. If 3 lights move together, my brain might connect them into a solid craft. A group of birds crossing a bright area of sky might briefly form a V, though birds could not explain the roar or apparent size. A cloud opening, searchlight, or reflected light might create a moving, angular shadow. But I remember a physical plane, not only lights. There is also the possibility of a military aircraft. Some aircraft have broad, angular silhouettes that can appear triangular from below. A powerful jet crossing the mountain could produce the noise I remember. If it flew at a legal but relatively low altitude, a child might perceive it as nearly touching the treetops. The guide may have been familiar with aircraft in the area and continued talking. The other students might not have looked up quickly enough. By the time I asked, the object was gone, and they assumed I was referring to something they had missed. That is one of the more practical explanations. It accounts for the V-shape, engine noise, and short duration. It does not fully explain the silence of the group, but human attention is strange. People can miss surprisingly obvious events when focused on another task. The students may have been watching their footing in darkness. The guide may have been trying to keep the group moving. A loud aircraft could pass overhead while most people simply waited for the noise to fade. Later, because it was not important to them, they might forget it almost immediately. My friend's denial may have meant they did not see the shape, not that they heard absolutely nothing. I may have asked, "Did you see that plane?" rather than, "Did you hear and feel that?" If they answered no, I interpreted it as denial of the entire event. Over the years, the conversation could become simplified. I saw and heard something. They experienced nothing. The original exchange may have been less clear, but I remember looking at the guide during the noise. His mouth seemed to be moving, yet I could not hear him. That visual detail makes the experience feel external. The roar blocked his voice. If the noise existed only inside my head, I might still see him talking silently. An auditory hallucination could produce exactly that effect. But if the sound was real, everyone should have experienced some interruption. Perhaps they did. The guide may have raised his voice or stopped speaking, and I failed to notice because I was looking upward. After the aircraft passed, he resumed without commenting. To a group of children, that might signal that nothing dangerous had occurred. Most students would follow his behavior. If the adult did not react, they would continue walking. I reacted because the shape frightened me. Another possibility is that I briefly became separated from the group's shared moment. Not physically, but mentally. Sometimes memories contain an unreal quality because the person's attention narrowed so completely that other people seemed absent. The guide and students were still around me, but for those seconds, my brain stopped processing them. The aircraft became the entire world. When I returned to normal awareness, everyone seemed unchanged. The contrast created the impression that time or perception had split. That may be what frightened me most. The event was not only an unidentified aircraft sighting, it was an experience of being alone while surrounded by people. The world shook for me and remained normal for them. The extraterrestrial explanation gives that isolation a purpose. Perhaps the craft was not operating like an ordinary aircraft. Maybe it could affect only certain observers. Maybe it passed through the area without producing sound or force for everyone else. What I interpreted as noise and shaking might have been a direct effect on me rather than on the environment. Stories about unidentified craft often include unusual perceptions, missing time, silence, pressure, or witnesses reporting different experiences. It is tempting to place my memory inside that category, but doing so does not provide evidence. It only compares one mystery with other mysteries. I did not see occupants, unusual lights, impossible acceleration, or the craft stopping in the air. I saw a V-shaped object cross overhead once. It did not return. There was no mark on the ground, and no physical effect I could later verify. The strongest evidence against a normal aircraft is that nobody else noticed. But that is also the strongest evidence that the event may have been perceptual. If the ground truly shook like a major earthquake, and the sound truly made speech impossible, the entire group should remember. The guide especially should have reacted. An adult responsible for children on a night hike would not ignore a dangerously low aircraft. That leaves several possibilities. My memory exaggerates the intensity. The group noticed but did not consider it important. The sound and vibration came from a private neurological or psychological event, or something happened that did not follow the normal rules of shared perception. I cannot choose with certainty. The most reasonable explanation is probably a real aircraft combined with darkness, mountain acoustics, exhaustion, and fear. I saw a large angular silhouette and misjudged its altitude. Its engine noise echoed through the terrain, creating a powerful rumble. The vibration affected me strongly. My companions either did not see the craft or forgot it because they were focused on the hike. When they denied seeing it, my childhood memory turned the event into something only I had experienced. That explanation requires no extraterrestrial technology or break in reality. It is also possible that I had a brief hallucination or migraine-like episode. The fact that no one else reacted supports that possibility. I would rather know which explanation is true, but there is no way to return to that night and test it. I did not ask the guide afterward. I did not write down the exact time or location. There were no photographs. I only asked two friends, and both said they had no idea what I meant. Maybe one of the other students saw it too and remained silent because nobody else reacted. Perhaps someone from that group remembers the same aircraft and assumes they were the only witness. I will probably never know. What remains is the moment itself. We are walking through the woods on the first night of camp. The guide is speaking a few steps away. I look up. A vast V-shaped object moves across the dark sky. It seems low enough to strike the trees. The sound arrives and becomes everything. The guide's voice disappears. The ground moves beneath me. For several seconds, the mountain feels as though it is being torn apart by the passage of the craft. Then it is gone. The night returns. The trail is still there. The other students keep walking. No one points upward. No one asks what happened. My best friend looks at me with confusion when I mention the plane. Another friend says they saw nothing. I am left standing among 8 people who seem to have passed through a completely different version of the same moment. Maybe it was an aircraft. Maybe the earth never moved, and the roar existed only inside my head. Maybe fear, exhaustion, and darkness transformed something ordinary into the most overwhelming sensory experience of my childhood. Those answers are possible. But whenever I remember Mount Baldy, I do not first think about the camp, the cabins, or the trees. I think about that black V crossing above us. I remember the world becoming unbearably loud, and I remember looking at the people around me, waiting for someone else to show fear, while every one of them continued through the woods as though the night had remained perfectly still.
Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue.
When I was in first grade, my parents bought a piece of land for an unbelievably low price. The price was so good that my mother felt she could not refuse it. It seemed like the kind of opportunity a family might never get again. There was a reason it was so cheap. The area had a reputation. People in town called it cursed land. Neighbors and relatives warned my mother not to buy it. Some spoke as though bad things had happened there before. Others simply said the property felt wrong and should be left alone. My mother did not believe rumors were a good enough reason to walk away from an affordable piece of land. People call places cursed for all kinds of reasons. A property may flood, have legal problems, contain unstable ground, or simply belong to someone the community dislikes. Stories grow whenever land remains empty for a long time. She believed the warnings were superstition. The family bought it. A river ran along one side of the property. My parents wanted to build a wall around the perimeter, especially near the water. Workers were hired, materials were brought in, and construction began. Almost immediately, something went wrong. The workers would build part of the wall during the day. When they returned, sections had been torn down. At first, everyone assumed there was a normal explanation. Maybe the ground near the river was unstable. Perhaps the mortar had not set correctly. Rain, water pressure, or shifting soil could cause a new wall to collapse, especially if the foundations were not deep enough. The workers repaired it and continued. The next day, the wall was damaged again. This kept happening. They would start over, and somehow the work would be undone. The way my family told it, the wall did not simply crack or lean. It looked as though someone had deliberately pulled it down. No one knew who would do that. There was nothing valuable to steal. The land was empty, and the wall had not been built high enough to block access to anything. Perhaps local people wanted the construction stopped because they believed the property was cursed. Someone could have entered at night and destroyed the work to frighten my parents away. It is also possible the riverbank was less stable than anyone realized. A collapse can look violent and deliberate, even when it comes from weak soil and poor support. But every new failure strengthened the rumors. People who had warned my mother felt proven right. The land did not want to be built on. At least, that was what they said. One afternoon after school, my mother brought me to the property. I did not want to be there. I was tired, impatient, and probably hungry. I remember throwing a tantrum while the adults were trying to work. I complained loudly and refused to calm down. One of the workers became nervous. He told my mother to make me stop. He said the spirits on the land might fixate on me if I continued drawing attention to myself. According to the workers, they had seen a ball of light moving around the property. It drifted across the land without an obvious source. They believed it was a bad spirit. A floating light can have many ordinary explanations. It might have been a torch, a reflection from the river, an insect near someone's eyes, distant headlights, or light moving through dust or mist. People working in heat and exhaustion can also mistake brief flashes in their vision for external objects. But the workers did not see it as a reflection. They believed something was roaming the land. And because I was the youngest and loudest person there, one of them feared I had attracted its attention. I do not remember whether my mother took the warning seriously at the time. She may have told him not to frighten me. She may have simply taken me home. What happened that night is one of the clearest memories of my childhood. I began vomiting blood. It was not a small amount. I remember holding a bucket. Blood kept coming out of me again and again. I felt nauseated and confused, but I did not feel sick in the ordinary way. I do not remember having a fever, severe stomach pain, or symptoms that warned us something was about to happen. One moment I had been a difficult but otherwise normal child. Then I was filling a bucket with blood. My parents panicked. They rushed me to the emergency room. Vomiting blood is a medical emergency at any age. It can come from the stomach or esophagus, but sometimes blood swallowed from the nose, mouth, or throat can later be vomited. A child may not realize they have had a nosebleed while lying down. Blood can also look more dramatic when mixed with saliva, stomach contents, or water. But to my parents, it looked as though I was losing an impossible amount. The doctors and nurses examined me. I remember adults looking confused. The detail my family repeated afterward was that the blood I had vomited did not match my blood type. That claim became one of the most frightening parts of the story. As a child, I understood it in the simplest possible way. Blood was coming out of my body, but it belonged to someone else. Even now, that idea is difficult to make sense of medically. If blood is genuinely vomited from inside a person's digestive system, it should normally be that person's blood. A different result might indicate a laboratory error, a contaminated sample, a misunderstanding about what was tested, or blood that had entered the mouth from an outside source. It is also possible that the adults misunderstood something the hospital staff said. Doctors may have been discussing whether the material was blood at all, whether a test had produced an uncertain reaction, or whether the sample was usable. During an emergency, frightened parents can remember fragments of technical conversations and later turn them into a simpler statement. It was not her blood type. That does not mean anyone deliberately changed the story. Memory compresses confusion into a detail that can be repeated. But at the time, my parents believed the hospital could not explain what was happening. The vomiting continued. They were desperate. My mother contacted a traditional healer, someone our family described as a witch doctor. I remember her appearance clearly. She was an extremely old woman, or at least she appeared ancient to me. Her hair was long and white. Her face was deeply wrinkled. She looked as though she had stepped directly out of a frightening film. At my age, I may have exaggerated her appearance in memory. A woman in her 70s could seem 100 years old to a child. The fear surrounding the situation would have made every feature sharper. Still, I remember being frightened when she arrived. She began performing a cleansing ritual. She burned something that may have been sage or another herb and moved the smoke around my body. She chanted continuously. The room filled with the smell of burning plants. Adults stood around watching. The ritual lasted a long time, perhaps close to an hour. I was weak and confused. I do not know how much of it I understood. I only knew that the woman believed something had attached itself to me at the property. She treated the illness as an attack rather than a medical condition. Then, the vomiting stopped. It seemed sudden. After hours of blood and panic, my body became quiet. What happened next is the part of the memory that has never left me. The healer began vomiting blood. It appeared as though whatever had been happening to me had moved into her. She had taken it away and placed it inside herself. I do not remember exactly how the ritual ended or what she did to get rid of it afterward. That part is unclear. What I remember is the transfer. I stopped. She began. To a frightened child, there was only one explanation. The thing inside me had entered her. Before leaving, she told my parents that I had 1 foot in the human world and 1 foot in the spirit world. She said that was why I had been vulnerable to attack. I never forgot those words. For years, I wondered what they meant. Did she believe I was unusually sensitive to spirits? Had I been born partly connected to something other people could not see? Could the thing from the land find me again? The idea was not comforting. It made me feel as though the boundary protecting everyone else was weaker around me. My parents eventually sold the property. No house was built there. As far as I know, the land remains empty. I am relieved my family no longer owns it. Looking back as an adult, I know there are possible explanations for every part of the story. The wall may have collapsed because it was being built beside a river. Soil near water can shift, erode, or become saturated. If the foundations were shallow, a newly constructed wall might repeatedly fail. The workers may have described it as being torn down because that was how the damage looked. Or someone from the area may really have destroyed it because they did not want anyone developing the property. The stories about cursed land could motivate people to interfere. Once the workers expected something supernatural, strange lights and construction failures would seem connected. The ball of light might have been ordinary. Reflections from moving water can appear in unexpected places. A person carrying a lamp beyond the property could seem like a light floating without a body. Dust, moisture, and insects can create glowing shapes when they pass close to a light source. Even a visual disturbance in someone's eyes can look like a moving orb. The warning about spirits fixating on me may have influenced how the illness was interpreted afterward. If I had become sick on any other night, the adults might have searched only for a medical explanation. Because a worker had warned us earlier that day, the timing felt meaningful. The sickness seemed like proof that he had been right. But children can develop sudden medical emergencies without warning. Vomiting blood can result from irritation or injury in the digestive tract. Swallowed blood. Severe vomiting that damages tissue. Medication, poisoning, infection. or conditions that may not have been immediately obvious. I was young enough that I might not remember earlier symptoms. Perhaps I had swallowed something, injured my mouth, or experienced a heavy nosebleed. The feeling that I was not sick does not rule out a physical cause. Children do not always understand or remember what illness felt like. The amount of blood may also have been smaller than it appeared. A little blood can spread through liquid and make an entire bucket look red. When a family tells the story for years, there was blood in the bucket can become the bucket was full of blood. The emotional memory remains true even if the measurement changes. I was vomiting something red enough to terrify everyone. That alone was serious. The blood type detail is harder to accept literally. Blood typing is not usually a simple visual judgment. A proper sample must be collected and tested carefully. Material vomited into a bucket would be mixed with saliva, food, stomach acid, and possibly other substances. Testing it accurately might be difficult. A result could be contaminated or misread. Perhaps a nurse said the sample did not react as expected, and my parents understood that as a different blood type. Perhaps the blood had come from an adult nearby, although I cannot imagine how enough of someone else's blood would enter a child's stomach unnoticed. It is also possible that this detail entered the story later. My parents may have told people the doctors couldn't explain the blood, and over time that became it wasn't even her blood type. I do not want to accuse my family of inventing anything. Traumatic events are remembered through fear, and fear is not precise. The healer's vomiting also has ordinary possibilities. The smoke may have made her nauseated. Burning herbs in an enclosed room can irritate the throat and stomach. Chanting for a long time, bending over, fasting, or breathing smoke could cause coughing or vomiting. If she already had a stomach condition, the physical strain of the ritual might trigger bleeding. She may also have used a prepared substance as part of the performance. Some healers create dramatic signs to convince families that an illness has been transferred or removed. A red liquid hidden in the mouth or swallowed beforehand could later be produced as blood. I do not know whether this woman was sincere, deceptive, or both. Traditional healers may genuinely believe in their methods while also using performance to make invisible ideas feel physical. If she vomited something red immediately after I stopped, my family would naturally see a transfer. The two events may have been unrelated. My illness may have ended on its own at the same time. Many medical episodes happen in waves. Bleeding can stop when a small tear seals, an irritated area settles, or the body rests. The ritual lasted around an hour, giving the condition time to change. If doctors had already given me fluids or medication at the hospital, those treatments might also have started working later. The family may remember the healer as the cause because she was present at the moment the symptoms ended. That does not mean the ritual had no effect at all. Fear and stress can worsen nausea. A ritual can calm a child and reassure the family. Slower breathing, stillness, and the belief that help has arrived may reduce symptoms connected to panic or repeated retching. But that would not explain genuine blood by itself. The safest conclusion is that I had a real medical event, and the adults around me interpreted it through both hospital medicine and local spiritual beliefs. Neither side provided an explanation my family found satisfying. The hospital was confused. The healer offered a clear story. Something from the land had attacked me because I stood too close to the spirit world. Clear stories are powerful during emergencies. They tell people why something happened, who is responsible, and what must be done. The healer's explanation also connected every strange detail. The cheap, cursed property, the wall that would not remain standing, the ball of light, the worker's warning, my tantrum, the blood, the healer becoming ill. Without the spiritual explanation, these events were separate and chaotic. With it, they became one sequence. The land contained a malevolent force. I attracted its attention. It entered me. The healer pulled it out. My family escaped by selling the property. That story has remained because it makes emotional sense. Whether it is physically true is a different question. I also wonder how much I remember directly and how much I learned from hearing the story repeated. I clearly remember the bucket. I remember feeling nauseated and confused. I remember the old woman, the smoke, and the chanting. But was I awake for every detail? Did I personally see her vomiting blood, or did my parents tell me afterward? Did she truly look 100 years old, or did that image grow from childhood fear? Did the ritual last an hour, or did it only feel endless? Childhood memories can combine direct experience with family retellings until there is no visible seam between them. That does not make the memory meaningless. Something frightening happened. My parents were desperate enough to call both doctors and a healer. The event became part of our family's understanding of the property. The land remained empty after we sold it, which made the story seem even more convincing. But there may be ordinary reasons no one developed it. Riverfront land can be difficult or expensive to build on. It may flood. The soil may be unstable. Permits may be hard to obtain. A wall that repeatedly collapses suggests a serious structural problem. The reputation of being cursed could also reduce interest from buyers. The land might remain empty because everyone in town heard the same stories my family did. A rumor can shape reality without any spirit being present. People avoid the property. Construction stops. Nothing is built. Then its emptiness becomes further proof of the curse. Even knowing all of that, I understand why my mother eventually sold it. A piece of land is not worth living in constant fear. Every construction problem would become another warning. Every childhood illness would feel like an attack. If we had built a house there, my family might have blamed every creak, argument, injury, or financial problem on the property. Leaving ended that cycle. The phrase about having one foot in the spirit world stayed with me longer than the land itself. For a child, it can be dangerous to hear that they are specially vulnerable to unseen forces. It can make normal nightmares, shadows, and illnesses feel supernatural. A noise at night becomes something reaching across the boundary. A fever becomes another attack. Even as an adult, part of me still remembers the healer's certainty. She looked at me and spoke as though she knew something about me that my own family did not. Perhaps she used the same explanation for many sensitive or frightened children. It made her role necessary. If I was unusually connected to the spirit world, only someone like her could protect me. That possibility should be considered. But I cannot completely dismiss the experience. The timing was extraordinary. A worker warned that the spirits would notice me. That same night, I began vomiting blood. The hospital reportedly could not explain why the blood did not match me. The healer performed a ritual. I stopped vomiting. She began. The property was eventually abandoned and remains empty. When placed together, those details still feel like something more than coincidence. The most disturbing part is not the ball of light, or even the wall. It is the idea of blood coming from a child's body, while the adults insist it does not belong to her. That image violates something basic. The body should not produce evidence from another person. If the story happened exactly as remembered, it is difficult to explain. But I no longer know whether that detail is exact. There may be medical records somewhere, though after so many years they would be difficult to find. Those records might contain a simple explanation my family never understood. They might show that the blood type was never tested. They might mention a nosebleed, stomach irritation, or a minor injury. Or they might confirm that the doctors truly faced something unusual. Without those records, I am left with memory. I still see myself holding the bucket. I am small enough that the adults tower around me. I do not understand why blood keeps coming out. My parents are frightened. The doctors seem uncertain. Then the old woman arrives. White hair, wrinkled skin, smoke moving around her hands, words I cannot understand. She chants for what feels like an hour. The room smells like burned plants. My stomach finally becomes still. Then she bends forward and produces the same red substance I had been vomiting. Everyone sees it as proof. She has taken something from me. Before she leaves, she tells my parents that I am standing between two worlds. 1 foot with the living, 1 foot somewhere else. I cannot prove that a spirit attacked me. A medical event, unstable construction, local superstition, and a dramatic ritual can explain much of the story. The blood type claim may be a misunderstanding. The healer's reaction may have been caused by smoke, illness, or performance. The land may remain empty because it is difficult to build beside the river. Those explanations are reasonable, and one or several are probably true. But reason does not erase the memory of how the events felt. To my family, the land had been resisting us before I ever became sick. The wall would not stand. Lights moved where no person stood. A worker warned my mother that something had noticed me. Then the warning seemed to come true before the day was over. I am glad my parents sold the property. Maybe they escaped nothing more than bad soil and a town full of rumors. Maybe they prevented years of fear from becoming attached to every part of our lives. Or maybe the warnings were right, and the low price was never a bargain at all. The land remains empty now. No home stands on it. The river continues moving beside it. And whenever I think about that place, I do not picture the broken wall or the strange ball of light. I picture a first-grade child holding a bucket while blood that supposedly belonged to someone else kept pouring from her mouth. Then I picture an old woman breathing smoke over her, taking the sickness into herself, and calmly explaining that the child had never belonged entirely to this world. I cannot remember exactly how old I was when the first incident happened, but I was probably around 12 or 13. I was sitting alone in the living room, watching television. This was back when televisions were much older and less reliable than the ones people use now. If there was no signal or the channel was not tuned correctly, the screen would fill with gray and white static. The picture looked like countless tiny dots moving rapidly across the glass. The television would usually produce a steady hissing sound at the same time. Most people changed the channel immediately because there was nothing to watch, but I was busy doing something else in the room. I cannot remember whether I was looking for an object, writing something down, or simply distracted. I left the television on the static channel. The room was otherwise quiet. The gray pattern moved across the screen while the speaker continued making that flat rushing noise. Then, without warning, I heard laughter coming from the television. It was not normal laughter from a comedy program or an audience. It was deep and exaggerated. The best way I can describe it is a theatrical, evil laugh, like someone in a horror film laughing because something terrible was about to happen. The sound seemed to rise out of the static. I froze for only a moment. There had been no clear picture and no program playing. The television had been producing nothing except gray noise. And then a voice appeared inside it. The laugh felt directed at me. I did not stay long enough to listen for anything else. I rushed toward the television, turned it off, and ran to my bedroom. Once the screen went dark, the sound stopped. I did not turn it back on to see whether it would happen again. At that age, I did not know much about how old televisions worked. I only knew that an empty channel should not suddenly laugh at someone sitting alone in the room. I imagined a voice hiding somewhere behind the static. Perhaps it had been waiting for me to notice it. For a while afterward, I disliked leaving the television on a channel with no signal. The static itself became uncomfortable. Before the incident, it had only been electronic noise. Afterward, it sounded like something that might contain voices if I listened for too long. There are ordinary explanations for what I heard. Old analog televisions did not always receive one clean signal at a time. A channel that looked like static could still pick up weak pieces of another broadcast. Sound and picture did not always arrive with equal strength. It was possible for a television to receive a short burst of audio from a distant channel while the screen continued showing mostly noise. The laugh may have come from a film, advertisement, cartoon, comedy show, or another program that the television briefly detected. Because I did not hear the dialogue before or after it, the laugh seemed to appear alone. The signal may have faded again immediately. That would have made it much more frightening than hearing it in its proper context. Interference from another electronic device could also have entered the television's speaker. Older televisions sometimes picked up radio transmissions, nearby broadcasts, or signals from poorly shielded equipment. A voice from a radio, walkie-talkie, or another source might become distorted as it passed through the television. A normal person laughing could sound deep and unnatural after electronic interference changed the pitch and clarity. The static may also have contained patterns that my brain interpreted as laughter. Humans naturally search for voices inside random noise. People sometimes believe they hear words in running water, fans, air conditioners, or white noise. If the television hiss changed rhythm for several seconds, my mind may have organized it into a familiar sound. Because I was alone and young, the sound became an evil laugh rather than meaningless electronic variation. But I remember it as unmistakable. It had tone, rhythm, and intention. It did not sound like a few random bursts of static. It sounded as if someone knew how frightening it would be to laugh through an empty television. Even if the explanation was only a weak broadcast signal, the experience stayed with me because of how suddenly the room changed. 1 second, I was sitting in an ordinary living room. The next, the television seemed aware that I was there. The second incident was much worse. I was lying in bed when I woke from a nightmare. I do not remember what the nightmare had been about. The dream itself disappeared quickly, leaving only the feeling that something was wrong. I may not even have been fully awake. The room looked familiar, but my mind still felt trapped between the dream and reality. Then, I heard what sounded like gunshots. The noise was extremely loud. It seemed as though someone had fired a rifle directly beside me. The sound did not come from far outside the house. It felt close enough to explode inside the bedroom. I also remember hearing or seeing birds flying away. They may have been ducks or another type of bird. The image is difficult to separate from the sound. I remember wings, movement, and the sense of birds scattering after the gunfire. It was almost like a hunting scene had broken into my bedroom. A rifle fired, and birds escaped into the distance. But I was still lying in bed. There was no field, lake, or hunter near me. The experience felt partly real and partly connected to the nightmare I had just left. I became terrified and tried to call for my mother. I used all the strength I had to yell, but my voice would not work. Only a weak whisper came out. I tried again. I felt as though I were shouting, but the sound remained quiet and powerless. My mother was somewhere else in the house, and I desperately wanted her to hear me. The harder I tried, the more frightened I became. I could not understand why my body was refusing to do something as simple as call for help. Then I looked toward the far left corner of my bedroom. There was something standing or leaning there. A red figure with horns. It looked like a demon. The closest comparison I can make is Hellboy, but what I saw looked much worse. It was not a friendly or heroic version of a red-horned character. It looked like something that belonged in a nightmare. The figure was leaning against my heater. That detail has always disturbed me. It was not lunging toward me or trying to hide. It seemed relaxed. It leaned there as though it had been in the room for a while and had no reason to hurry. It knew I could see it. It also seemed to know that I could not call loudly enough for anyone to come. I do not remember its face clearly. What remains is the red color, the horns, the large human-like body, and its position beside the heater. The room around it was real. The heater was exactly where it belonged. The corner had the correct shape. The figure appeared inside my actual bedroom rather than in a separate dream landscape. That made it much harder to dismiss. I do not remember exactly what happened next. The memory becomes unclear after I saw the figure. I think I managed to get out of bed and run into my mother's room. Perhaps the paralysis or weakness released suddenly. Maybe I fell asleep again and later remembered running to her. The ending is not as clear as the beginning. What I remember with certainty is waking frightened, hearing the rifle like blasts, experiencing the birds, failing to raise my voice, and seeing the red-horned figure leaning against the heater. Unlike the television incident, the second experience has a strong explanation connected to sleep. It contains nearly every feature of a waking nightmare or sleep paralysis episode. A person can become conscious before the body and brain have fully left the dream state. The bedroom becomes visible, but images and sounds from the dream continue appearing over the real surroundings. The person may feel unable to move, speak, or breathe normally. They may see someone standing in the room or sense a threatening presence nearby. Even if I could move part of my body, the failure of my voice suggests that I had not fully awakened. During certain stages of sleep, the brain reduces control over many muscles. This prevents people from physically acting out their dreams. Sometimes awareness returns while this muscle inhibition is still active. A person may try to scream, but only a whisper, groan, or small breath comes out. The experience feels as though something is deliberately silencing them. In reality, the muscles used for strong speech may still be partly in the sleep state. That matches what happened to me. I believed I was yelling for my mother. Inside my mind, the effort felt enormous, but the actual sound was barely audible. The gunshot sound may have been another sleep-related event. Some people experience what is called exploding head syndrome. Despite the frightening name, it does not involve the head physically exploding or usually indicate an injury. A person falling asleep or waking may suddenly hear an imagined blast, crash, gunshot, electrical crack, or explosion. The sound feels extremely loud and close, even though nobody else hears it. It may cause immediate panic. The brain appears to generate the noise during a disrupted transition between sleep stages. A rifle firing beside me fits that description. The sound may have come from inside my own sleeping brain rather than anywhere in the room. The birds could have been the final image from the nightmare. Perhaps I had been dreaming about hunting, gunfire, or animals. When I woke, the sound of the imaginary rifle remained, along with the image of birds flying away. The dream scenery disappeared, but those pieces continued for several seconds inside the bedroom. The red demon may have been part of the same process. A shadow, coat, heater, chair, or object in the corner gave the hallucination a physical location. My half-awake mind added a body, horns, color, and a threatening face. The figure looked solid because waking hallucinations can be extremely detailed. They do not always appear transparent or dreamlike. People may see realistic strangers, animals, insects, or monsters. The images can remain in place while the person looks directly at them. The fact that the demon leaned against the real heater strongly supports this explanation. My brain used the heater and surrounding shadows as a framework. Something ordinary may have formed the lower part of the body. A dark object above it may have created the horns. The red color could have come from a small light, fabric, curtains, a digital clock, or dream imagery. Even if the room was dark, the mind can generate color during a hallucination. It does not need a real red object. The figure's resemblance to Hellboy may have come from an image I had seen earlier in life. Maybe I had watched a film, seen a poster, read a comic, or encountered another red demon character. The brain does not usually invent frightening images from nothing. It combines familiar elements. Horns immediately suggest a demon. A large red body suggests a creature associated with fire or hell. The heater in the corner may have strengthened that association because it produced heat. My mind placed a red horned figure beside it because the symbols fit together. At the time, however, it did not feel symbolic. It felt present. I was not calmly observing a dream image and thinking about where it came from. I believed something had entered my room. The earlier gunshots and birds made the world feel unstable. Then my voice failed. By the time I saw the demon, I was already in a state of extreme fear. Fear can make a hallucination more threatening. A vague red shape becomes a horned creature. A heater becomes a place for it to lean. A shadow becomes a face. The figure's relaxed posture may also have come from the shape of an object, rather than intentional behavior. A hanging coat or blanket can look as though a person has placed one shoulder against a wall. The heater's vertical lines and nearby shadows might create the impression of legs or arms. Because the object did not move, my mind interpreted the stillness as confidence. It was not attacking because it did not need to. That emotional meaning may have developed afterward. It is also possible that the gunshots came from outside. New York streets, car exhausts, construction noises, fireworks, doors slamming, or actual distant gunfire can wake someone suddenly. A loud external noise could blend into a dream and produce the image of birds scattering. If I woke at the exact moment of a real bang, my brain might create a visual story to explain it. The sound seemed directly beside me because sleep and fear distorted its distance. A car backfiring outside could become a rifle in the bedroom. Birds may genuinely have flown away after the noise, especially if I could hear them outside. But I do not remember looking through a window or seeing real birds in the sky. The image feels more dreamlike than the bedroom itself. The inability to call loudly still points toward a sleep transition. The demon could also have been a real person or object briefly misidentified. A family member may have entered the room after hearing me move. In darkness, I could mistake clothing, hair, or a hood for horns. Red clothing might make the person look demonic. But someone real would probably speak or react when I tried to call for my mother. No one later admitted standing beside the heater. A stranger entering the room is possible in theory, but there was no evidence of an intruder. The figure's disappearance and the dreamlike sounds make a sleep hallucination far more likely. I have wondered whether the first incident with the television influenced the second. After hearing the evil laugh from the static, part of me may have become more sensitive to the idea that ordinary objects could contain something threatening. A television could produce a voice. A dark corner could hold a demon. Both experiences involved something familiar behaving in an impossible way. The television was supposed to show programs, not laugh through static. The bedroom was supposed to be safe, not contain a horned figure. But the events probably had completely different causes. The television likely received a broken piece of audio. The bedroom experience likely came from a nightmare, sleep paralysis, or another waking hallucination. They became connected only because both frightened me. The first happened while I was awake and alone. The second happened after sleep when my senses could not be trusted. There is no need for one presence to explain both. Still, the supernatural interpretation is difficult to avoid when remembering them together. The laugh could be understood as the first sign that something was aware of me. Years later, or sometime afterward, it appeared in a more complete form. First, it used the television speaker. Then, it entered the room as a red-horned figure. The gunshots and birds may have announced its arrival. My voice failed because it did not want me to call for help. It leaned against the heater and watched because it knew I was trapped. That creates a frightening story, but it depends on connecting two events without evidence. Electronic interference and sleep hallucinations are common enough to explain them separately. The fact that both felt evil does not mean they shared a source. Fear gives many unrelated things the same emotional character. A distorted laugh sounds evil because deep, unnatural laughter is associated with danger. A horned red figure looks demonic because that imagery is culturally familiar. My brain may have used the language of horror to interpret confusing sensory events. I also do not know how accurately I remember the figure now. Memory changes over time. Maybe it was not bright red. Perhaps the corner had a reddish glow, and the figure was mostly dark. Maybe the horns were two shadows behind its head. The comparison to Hellboy may have come later, after I searched for a way to describe it. Once I used that comparison, the memory may have become more like the character. The figure could now look more detailed in my mind than it did during the actual event. The same is true of the television laugh. It may have been only a short piece of distorted dialogue or audience laughter. Over time, it became a deep, deliberate, evil laugh. The emotional truth remained, while the sound itself became harder to separate from the story I told about it. That does not mean the experiences were invented. Something happened both times. The television produced or seemed to produce laughter. I woke from a nightmare, heard explosive sounds, could not raise my voice, and saw a frightening figure. The question is not whether I was scared. The question is what created the sensations. The sleep explanation for the second incident is strong enough that I do not need to believe a demon was physically present. The failure of my voice is especially important. That is a classic sign that the brain and body were not fully awake together. The image of a creature inside the real room is also common in waking hallucinations. The gunshot-like noise can be explained by exploding head syndrome or the dream continuing for a moment after awakening. All of the pieces fit one disrupted transition from sleep. Perhaps I had a nightmare about hunting or gunfire. I began waking. The dream's rifle blast became an explosion beside my bed. Birds flew out of the fading dream. My body remained partly paralyzed, reducing my voice to a whisper. A shadow near the heater became a red demon. Then full wakefulness returned, and I escaped to my mother's room. That is probably the complete sequence. It is a medical and psychological explanation, but it does not make the memory weak. Sleep hallucinations are frightening precisely because they use the real room. If the demon had appeared in a strange dream landscape, I would have dismissed it after waking. Instead, it leaned against my heater. It occupied a place I recognized. The familiar setting made it seem capable of remaining after the dream ended, Even now, I can reconstruct the room more easily than the nightmare. I remember waking with the feeling that something violent had just happened. A rifle-like crack exploded close to me. Ducks or other birds scattered away, their wings carrying them out of whatever dream I had been having. I tried to call my mother. My voice came out as a whisper. Then I looked toward the far left corner. The red-horned figure was already there. It did not rush into view. It did not step from the darkness. Like the laughter from the television, it seemed to begin in the middle of something, as though it had been present before I noticed. It leaned against the heater and watched me struggle. I cannot remember its disappearance. I cannot remember the exact moment my voice returned. I think I ran to my mother, but even that part is uncertain. The fear is clearer than the ending. That is another reason to believe the event belonged partly to sleep. Dream memories often break apart after the most intense image. The scene does not conclude logically. It simply stops. A real intruder would need to leave. A hallucination only needs the brain to wake fully. The most reasonable explanation for the first incident is a weak broadcast or audio interference passing through an old television. The most reasonable explanation for the second is a waking nightmare involving sleep paralysis, exploding head syndrome, and visual hallucination. Both can happen without anything supernatural being present. Those explanations are not excuses or attempts to dismiss what I experienced. They show how ordinary systems can create deeply frightening moments. An old television can produce a human voice from a screen that appears empty. A sleeping brain can place a detailed creature inside a real room while taking away the ability to call for help. The ordinary explanations are almost as disturbing as the paranormal ones because they reveal how quickly reality can become unreliable. I know that the red figure was probably not a demon. I know the laugh probably came from a program the television barely received, but knowledge arrived years after the fear. At the time, I was alone in the living room when a voice laughed through static. Later, I woke from a nightmare to the sound of a rifle firing beside me. Birds scattered. My mother's name would not rise above a whisper, and in the corner, something red and horned leaned against the heater as though it had been waiting for me to wake up.
Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.